This week we'll be talking a little bit about stress fractures and how they impact, in particular, runners. So I'm Greg, this is Blaine from Recover Physical Therapy in Twin Falls, Idaho. And as I said earlier, we're going to be talking a little bit about that. You were saying that you see this a fair amount as a physical therapist.
I do. We have some special equipment in our clinic that helps address stress fractures, so that's probably why I see it more often maybe than the average physical therapist. And I'm also a runner, so I'm kind of keen on running injuries, but yeah, stress fractures they're fractures that are caused by repetitive stresses, and so they're kind of hard to diagnose sometimes because people start running and they're easy to mistake for other injuries. But you most often see it in distance runners, and it will usually happen either in your femur or your tibia or in your metatarsal bones in your foot. It can happen in other bones too, but that's where it will most often happen.
Okay, so for the lay member of society, your femur, this is your thigh bone,
Yeah.
and then your tibia, that's going to be one of the bones in your shin.
Shin, oh yeah.
The metatarsal will be those bones in your feet.
Yes.
And so just think about those bones. And I think the metatarsals, correct me if I'm wrong, but those are the longer bones that create the arch in your foot, correct?
They're in your midfoot, yes.
Okay. So
They can also happen in your calcaneus or your heel bone. You'll see those in runners pretty often.
yeah, like heel spurs. Is it different than that?
It's different than a heel spur. Heel spur is more like a bone growth, and then a stress fracture is an actual fracture. You can see them in an X-ray sometimes, but they're more difficult to see in an X-ray than a traumatic fracture that happens because you fell or got in a car wreck.
Yeah. I've had some friends that have gotten them, but it's not like a lot. And so this is an injury that I'm not very familiar with. You obviously probably are a little bit more familiar with it since you've treated it. So.
Yeah, the difficulty with stress fractures is that runners it usually happens when they've been running a lot of miles, often when they're ramping up their mileage, preparing for a marathon or something like that. And then they can just real often mistake it for, like, maybe it happens in their foot and they might think it's a tendonitis or a plantar fasciitis, or it might happen in your shin bone and you think it's like shin splints. And so, unfortunately, they often will keep running on them way too long. And the bad thing about stress fractures is they take a long time to heal. And really the only thing you can do is stop running, and you have to stop for quite a long time. And then when you start running again, you have to build up your mileage really, really gradually and really carefully to avoid that.
Which is very hard for all of those of you that love to run. So
Yes.
So do you have exercises that go along with this?
We do, yeah. So stress fractures are one of those things, like a lot of injuries, especially running injuries, that an ounce of prevention is worth like a pound of treatment, or however that statement goes. But stress fractures usually happen, like I mentioned, when people are ramping up their mileage, and often they happen when there's not enough rest given after a run. And so, like, if you're training for a marathon, you have to put in a lot of volume, a lot of mileage, but it's also important to really schedule rest days in there, and sometimes even scheduling rest weeks. And so, say you're wanting to run a marathon and your goal is to build up to like 50 or 60 miles a week, which is common for marathon runners. So it's important to put a week in there where you maybe dial that mileage way down and you can focus on cross training. It doesn't mean you can't exercise. You can ride your bike, you can swim, you can lift weights, but it's important to give it a break once in a while and just recognize that those repetitive stresses can be hard on your bones.
So that's new to me, because when I ran my marathon, I had a running program that just basically gradually built up to the marathon mileage. And in fact, it never got to the actual mileage of the marathon. It just got to 24 miles. And then you ran it. It was a first marathon program.
Yeah.
What does that week where you dial back your distance, what does that look like?
So you don't stop running completely. So say you're running 30 miles a week or 40 miles a week, you might just run 10 miles a week that week. And instead of running 40 miles or however many you were going to, maybe substitute some of that with a bike ride or lifting weights. Weight training is generally very good. It puts a good slow, heavy strain on the bones and doesn't risk stress fracture.
Yeah, so like 10, man, yeah, when you're running 30 miles, 10 miles is like one workout almost. So,
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's important to recognize, like, the way you get stronger, whether it's running or lifting weights or anything, is you actually break your body down somewhat while you're exercising, and where you rebuild and get stronger is when you're resting and while you're sleeping. So adequate sleep is one of the best ways to avoid stress fractures. So there's good research to show that people who aren't getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep, they're more likely to have stress fractures. So that's crucial.
As a mid-40-year-old, I have to tell you that it gets harder to get that type of sleep sometimes.
Yes. I'm on the verge of being on the wrong side of 40, and I'm getting to that too.
All right, well, let's get into some exercises then, shall we?
Sure. And then, do you mind if I say one more thing?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Kind of common sense, but adequate nutrition. So make sure you're getting proper, calories and good balance of your macros. And so most runners have a pretty good handle on that. But if you don't know, there's lots of good apps out there. Like the MyFitnessPal app is probably the most common one, but there's lots of them. And just track what you're eating. And there's lots of good coaches out there too that can kind of help balance the mileage you're running with your nutrition.
Yeah.
So distance runners are often a little bit guilty of not getting enough calories in.
Yeah.
And that can contribute to stress fractures as well.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's get to it.
All right, so let's suppose we are distance runners and we're wanting to avoid stress fractures. So as mentioned earlier, we want to take some days off from running and focus on some weight training. So here's some basic ideas. Why don't we start with some squats,
Okay.
Greg? So Greg's holding about 40 or 60 pounds, and just doing
and we didn't need to be big. Sorry.
wait, what's that?
You said shallow squats. I think.
Oh, yeah, they can be shallow or deep. And so these exercises are good because they're a long, slow load. So it actually is good to load your bones. That's how they get stronger, kind of like muscles. But unlike running, where there's this repetitive stress where you're pounding on them every step, when you're doing weightlifting, you're kind of going slow and you're just holding that, and that load just slowly goes through your bone. And so these are good things to do to avoid. And you can go pretty heavy on these if you're going shallow, or if you're going deeper, you maybe want to go a little bit lighter. But these won't just help to avoid stress fractures, but they'll help to avoid a lot of other things too, like tendonitis type issues, which are very common for distance runners. And then you can also do some deadlifts. And so you can work your low back a little bit more by bending your knees less when you go down. Do you feel comfortable doing that, Greg?
You're gonna have to help me. How do I do with a kettlebell?
So you might just switch to one kettlebell.
Okay.
And just hold it in front of you, and you can just do some. And there's several different variations
Like this.
of deadlifts.
Or, yeah, because it's the lower back that you're focused on, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so you can do some deadlifts, and this is a good way to load up your spine, which can make your spine stronger as long as you start at good, appropriate loads that aren't too heavy and build up real gradually. And then the next exercise I would suggest for stress fracture prevention or prevention I should say, is like some calf raises on the edge of the step.
As we say, Blaine's favorite exercise right here.
Yeah, this is a bread and butter exercise that all runners should do. But just going slowly up and down on your tippy toes, and you can do this in a couple different variations where you can see Greg has his knee a little bit bent, and that's a good way to target a deeper muscle called your soleus. Or you can do it with your knee straight, and that targets a more superficial calf muscle called your gastrocnemius. And both variations are good and both are important. But you want to go nice and slow and just let yourself really feel the burn. So this is a very different type of strain, a very different type of workout on your muscles and bones than running is. And having that mix up, those variations are good. So the next exercise that Greg is going to demonstrate is just a lunge. So he's holding a 30-pound weight there. This can be done with weight, or you can also just do it with your body weight. It's plenty challenging. But just make sure you go nice and slow, and you can kind of hold it down at the bottom for a moment if you want to. Let's put a nice deep strain on your thigh muscles. And again, it's just a good variation it works the muscles and bones very differently than distance running. So mixing that up and getting some cross training and resting from running is a great way to avoid these injuries and also improve your performance as well, improve your speed.
So again, some of our favorite exercises if we're thinking about running, those squats, lunges, and calf raises. Pretty bread and butter type stuff, but a little bit different. The nuances that we saw on this and slowing it down just a little bit compared to what your normal workout might include.
Yeah, and these exercises the exercises in and of themselves may not prevent a stress fracture, but just the fact that you're taking a break from all the running and focusing on some different type of cross training is a good way that's what's really going to help you avoid the stress fracture.